Sir, it's good to have you with us. Moscow has accused NATO of threatening Russia's, and I quote, security and national interests by officially welcoming Finland into the fold. The Kremlin spokesperson said the move will force Moscow to, and again I quote here, take countermeasures to ensure our own security, both tactically and strategically. So I'll put tonight's question to you. How do you expect Moscow to respond?
Well, what we have seen is that Moscow, President Putin, has tried to deny sovereign independent nations in Europe to make their own choices, to choose their own path. That was actually the declared purpose of the invasion of Ukraine, was to prevent Ukraine from becoming a member, but also it was a declared policy from President Putin that he wanted Finland and Sweden to never become members of NATO, to close NATO's door. He's getting the exact opposite. He's getting more NATO in the eastern part of the alliance, and he's getting more NATO members, Finland and Sweden. And that's the way free democratic nations are reacting when an authoritarian power like Russia tries to control what neighbors can do and try to re-establish a sphere of influence.
In the past hour or so, Vladimir Putin has said, and I quote him here, the European Union has initiated a geopolitical confrontation with Russia. Your response?
This is not a confrontation, neither from the EU nor from NATO. NATO is a defensive alliance. NATO and Finland has never been and will never be a threat to Russia. It is Russia that has invaded neighbors, Georgia in 2008, Ukraine, Crimea in 2014, and then a full-fledged invasion last year. And that's the reason why countries in Europe, like Finland and Sweden, decide that they want to be part of NATO. And Finland joining NATO means that Finland is getting safer and NATO is getting stronger. And we demonstrate that NATO's door is open. It's not for Russia to decide who can be a NATO member. It's for independent democratic nations to decide.
Sweden also looking for membership. The Turkish foreign minister was present at the ceremony yesterday. In fact, he was standing right behind you as you welcomed Finland into the club. You have urged Turkey and Hungary to let Sweden join, and I quote you, without delay. Canada's foreign minister also with you in Brussels last hour, telling me she is confident in your leadership to get this done. Are you confident that you will get this done?
I'm confident that Sweden will become a member, not least because all NATO allies, also Turkey, invited Sweden to become a member at our summit last year in Madrid. And Sweden also fulfills the criteria, the demands that was agreed in connection with the Madrid summit, the trilateral agreement between Finland, Sweden and Turkey. And then, of course, I also strongly believe that Turkey has some legitimate security concerns. No other ally has suffered more terrorist attacks than Turkey, and the purpose of the dialogue we now have going on in NATO is how to ensure that those security threats are addressed in a proper way.
You said recently that the failure to incorporate Sweden at the same time as Finland, something you have spent considerable time on, was not a personal setback. You clearly believe that Sweden will still get membership, but do you still genuinely believe that this is not a personal setback at this point?
I generally believe that also Sweden will become a member, and I've stated clearly that the most important thing is not that Finland and Sweden join the alliance exactly at the same time. The most important thing is that also Sweden becomes a member in the near future. And we need to understand that this is so far the quickest accession process in NATO's modern history. Finland and Sweden applied in May last year. Already in June, all allies invited them to become members, and already now less than a year after. Finland is a member, and we are working hard to then also get Sweden as a full member in the near future. We also have to understand that Sweden is in a much better and much safer position now than before they applied, because as soon as all allies invited them, they got the status as an invitee, meaning that they are now integrating into NATO's military and civilian structures, participating in NATO military and civilian activities, and allies have provided bilateral security assurances. And also with Finland in, Sweden becomes even safer. And it's absolutely inconceivable that there will be any military threat or attack against Sweden without NATO reacting. So they are in a better place while we are working for the full-fledged membership also for Sweden.
The Ukrainian foreign minister has welcomed Finland's accession to NATO and the speed at which this has happened. He said the best way to guarantee security in Europe, which is what this is all about, at the end of the day, was to have Ukraine inside the alliance. Do you agree? And if so, when?
So NATO's position is that Ukraine will become a member of the alliance. Our immediate task, our main focus now is, of course, to provide support to Ukraine to ensure that Ukraine prevails as a sovereign, independent nation in Europe, which is a precondition for any meaningful discussion about membership. And thirdly, we're also now starting to work on a more long-term program where we can help Ukraine move from Soviet-era doctrines, standards, equipment to NATO standards, and also to increase their interoperability with NATO forces. We have not made any decisions on when a membership can be decided, but in the meantime, we need to ensure that Ukraine prevails and that we are helping Ukraine to move towards Euro-Atlantic integration.
Well, Hungary's foreign minister says that inviting Ukraine even to NATO meetings undermines the principle of the alliance's unity. What's your response to that?
Well, I think it's important to meet with Ukraine also in the well-established forum, the NATO-Ukraine Commission, as we did yesterday with Foreign Minister Kuleba, to discuss how to sustain the unprecedented support NATO and NATO allies are providing to Ukraine, but also to discuss reforms, but also to raise issues related to minority rights. So I think it is a good thing to have a platform where we can have dialogue and also address a wide range of issues which are important for Europe, for NATO allies, and for Ukraine.
Short term, long term for Ukraine here. Short term, it is desperate for more ammunition. It is absolutely clear that Europe cannot manufacture that ammunition quickly enough. What are you going to do about that?
Well, we are ramping up production. We saw already last fall that this has now become a war of attrition, which is a war of logistics. So we are working closely with the defense industry across the alliance to ramp up production, partly to be able to replenish our own stocks, but also, of course, to be able to continue to provide the support to Ukraine that they need to be able to launch new counteroffensives and to liberate more land. We also work with our partners outside NATO. We met with South Korea today. I went there some weeks ago. And for instance, South Korea is a NATO partner that is ramping up production, delivering more ammunition to NATO allies so we can replenish our stocks and then also be able to provide more support to Ukraine.
I have to ask you, China's leaders visited Moscow, of course, last month. Has been told reportedly by NATO members that there would be, and I quote here, consequences if China or Beijing supplies lethal aid to Moscow. Do you have any evidence that that is the intention? And what sort of consequences are we speaking about here, if indeed China did provide that lethal aid, sir?
We are not able to confirm that China has delivered lethal aid or weapons to Russia. But we are monitoring very closely what China does, because what we do know is that China and Russia are working more and more closely together, also in the military domain. They have joint naval air patrols, big military exercises together. China and Russia signed a joint declaration just weeks before the invasion last year, where they stated clearly that their partnership is without any limits, no limits. And then, of course, we also know that China has not condemned the illegal invasion of Ukraine by President Putin and Russia. And therefore, allies, not least our biggest ally, the United States, have made it clear that if China was to provide lethal aid to Russia, there will be profound consequences.